Yesterday, it was not just 6 months since the Russian full-scale invasion, it was also Ukraine's Independence Day.
Of
And
course.
Russia greeted Ukrainians with that by firing the biggest number of missiles since the start of the war. Well, at least the number of air raid alerts was the highest in one day since the start of the invasion. About 200 sirens were sounded across Ukraine yesterday. And Russia struck more than 50 cities and towns and villages, killing 25 people in a village of Choplin and Dnipro region, where they hit a passenger train, so killing passengers of a train. So, of course, that gives you an idea of the terror that Ukraine continues to live in for all these months.
Yes.
But at the same time, if we look at the polls and the mood in Ukraine, we'll be surprised to see how resilient Ukrainians are and how much they believe in their victory. So the poll was published last week, in which more than 90% of Ukrainians said that they believe that Ukraine will win this war and also will be able to restore the control over occupied territories, including Crimea and Donbass, something that might be looking very fantastic and, very far away in time. But people are very hopeful. And this gives you an idea of this incredible resilience and spirit of Ukrainians that is not fading away 6 months into the war.
Which was probably the largest element of Putin's miscalculation in the first place, to completely fail to appreciate just how... Well, it's an existential threat that Ukrainian people feel, I think, and therefore they will fight to their dying breath to resist the invasion.
Yes, well, absolutely. It's a war of annihilation, a genocidal war, and Russians are hell-bent on, just destroying Ukrainian independence, destroying Ukrainian state, Ukrainian identity, and Ukrainians are well aware of that. And I think increasingly also the other countries are getting aware of that. So it's not some sort of standoff between, NATO and Russia or some other reasons that Russia presented for this war,
Of
like
course.
some denazification of Ukraine, a complete nonsense. It's an existential battle for Ukrainians, and that explains this resilience, spirit, and defiance. And this is also the battle, of course, for the future of democracy, not just in Ukraine.
How, and I hope this isn't a silly question, how do you gauge whether things are going well or not? I mean, in the early days, it was a simple case of identifying what the objectives of the invaders were, and then measuring whether or not they had succeeded. Did they succeed in taking Kyiv, or did they succeed in besieging cities? We could work it out, but now it's become more attritional. How do you get a proper handle on where progress is being made or not made?
Well, you can still look at the map and see what territories Russia managed to capture in this last months, and there are very few. So they are making a very, very slow progress in the east of the country, and the battles there are very heavy. Then another criteria is, whether the Western aid is still flowing. Is the world still committed to stand with Ukraine and to support Ukraine? And of course, the news yesterday that the US will be sending aid, more, package, $3 billion package that Boris Johnson and his surprise visit to Kyiv yesterday promised more aid from the UK. This, of course, is very uplifting for Ukrainians, because I think, it's not an issue of how long and whether Ukrainians will be able to resist. I think the real variable that will determine the outcome of this war is whether the West will be, standing with Ukraine the way it has done before, and also whether the pressure on Russia will be increased, because while there were some welcome steps, they are not enough to defund Russian war machine. Sanctions on Russian energy sector are not as strong as they should be to make Ukraine win this war.
And do people speculate in Ukraine about how long it is likely to take, or is it simply a case of shoulders to the wheel and we are here for however long it needs?
Well, in this sense, the rhetoric of Ukrainian officials is very significant. While in the very first, stage of the war, they were assuring Ukrainians that it will be a quick battle.
Yes.
Ukraine will, win, or there will be somehow the war will be over soon. The rhetoric has changed. Then just today, Ukraine's Minister of Defense said that, well, it will be a long battle and we have to get prepared for that. And I think most people are now realizing that, and they are adjusting their lives accordingly. Either they are deciding to, leave Ukraine and become refugees, or if they are already refugees, to stay abroad, or, they just accept this risk and the fact that the war will be long, and they stay in Ukraine or return to Ukraine, but with full realization that the war might still go on for a long time, but also willing to contribute to this resistance by being inside Ukraine.
Have you personally been surprised by that?
Well, I wasn't surprised by the Ukrainians' resilience and their
No.
resistance.
Why
I
were
think,
so many people surprised, do you think, Olga, given that every Ukrainian I've spoken to has seen it almost as part of their identity? Why was the world, but of course Russia in particular, so ambushed by the reality of your national character?
well, I think it was partially, from maybe the misunderstanding or not total understanding of how Ukrainian society has changed since 2014 when
Right.
Russia first invaded and annexed Crimea, and how that actually shaped and strengthened Ukrainian national identity and the way people started to care more about what democracy means, what freedom means, what the human rights mean, because this is also the war for human rights, because
Yes.
we see complete disregard for them on territories occupied by Russia. So I think this extent of this transformation in Ukraine, both in terms of Ukrainian identity, but also in terms of the reforms, the reforms of the defense sector, we've seen that the Ukrainian army has really changed a lot and is, it's not worse or maybe better than many armies of the NATO countries currently, and very capable also to flexible, to come up, to adjust, to come up with innovative solutions. We're seeing now surprised words from some US officials who are saying that they have never expected that Ukrainians will be so good at, even with those limited weapons that they had at the very initial stage of this war, to be able to repel very strong, Russian attacks. So I think, of course, partially it's overestimation of the strengths of Russia, but it's also the underestimation of the strength, spirit, and the transformation of Ukraine.
That's absolutely fascinating. Thank you. How can my listeners access more of your work, Olga?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter, Olga Tokariuk, and you can listen to me on Radio Monocle and Monocle Mag. I'm their freelance correspondent in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Olga Tokariuk, the Ukrainian journalist speaking to us live from West Ukraine.